Hi everyone, today I'm going to be doing a review of the documentary Journey of an African Colony by Olasupo Shasore. If you have not seen it, it's currently available on YouTube. You can, not on YouTube, on Netflix. You can go there and knock yourself out. I think it's actually a very interesting one. Every Nigerian, everyone who wants to understand Nigeria should actually go ahead and see it. However, here's a review of it. I'll be sharing some of my own thoughts on the documentary and some of the things that I gleaned from it. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back. Journey of an African Colony is a very good documentary, and I think that every Nigerian should see it. Like I said earlier, it's a very good educational material. However, there are a few other things that I picked out from it. Yes, it was well produced. It was clearly, the quality of the pictures, the research, the depth of research, the places I traveled to London to interview people in different parts of the country, to get various perspectives about the country, went into various research, and so it was he had a lot of breadth in that sense, and so he brought certain new perspectives as well. For instance, he helped us understand the name Fayawo. Fayawo is a Yoruba word that actually means to crawl with your chest, and apparently is used these days in relation to smuggling. But he actually told us that you'll see in there that the source was during the First World War, was when that word came into the national lexicon. So you had that there. There are so many other things as well, so many individuals that are not usually normally mentioned in the discourse around the formation of Nigeria, as crucial to the founding of the country. He brought them into the picture, and I think that was very positive. The usual culprits like Fela Kuti's mother, Madam Kuti, was Fumilayo Kuti was obviously mentioned, but he also mentioned the likes of Pai Modu. Many new generation Nigerians may not be very familiar with that name, but I thought it was a nice one that he brought the name up. Onye Wura, some of those other names. The woman who led the so-called Aba protest, he helped us realize that no, the protest did not happen in Aba. It happened, somewhere else. Madam Ikpele Wura, the Yaoja of Lagos. So many individuals like that were crucial to the story of Nigeria, whom we normally do not mention. He brought them back into the discourse, and I think that was very positive. Also, another thing that I see with the documentary was the fact that I mentioned the quality of the production. It was top. It's Netflix quality, so it was very good. He also tried to dispel some of the notions, apart from highlighting some of the figures that are usually not mentioned. He also talked about individuals, try to elaborate on certain individuals that seem to be more or less heroes. People like Lord Lugard, he really had very strong words for Lugard, and I don't know if that's positive or negative. I feel in that sense he projected sometimes I felt his own personal bias into the narrative. So for instance, he really had very strong words about and very strong opinion about Lord Lugard, and he wasn't afraid to really express them. He mentioned the fact that a person of Lugard's character shouldn't be somebody that should be celebrated. In Nigeria, some of our democratic institutions, the Kogi House of Assembly being named after him, some of the new monuments that are named after him. So essentially, that is not the sort of person in terms of the role that he played. So he brought to light, some of those characters, and tried to expose the the attitudes of some of the European characters, people like Lord Lugard, and why reason why they shouldn't, be celebrated in the way that they seem to be in modern times. However, there were other things I would readily also point out about the documentary that I observed. When he talked about the issue of slavery, personally, the issue of slavery is one that I'm slightly invested in. Well, I wouldn't say I've read so much on it, but I read. I'm still, learning, trying to read much, a bit about, some of the things that went down there, and for me, I felt that the way the matter was treated. Now, he talked about the fact that slavery, that modern Nigerians, we Nigerians today, act as though slavery never existed on this, in our shores. Meanwhile, the bulk of the slaves that were exported out of the west coast of Africa passed through our ports, the Lagos ports, the Bight of Biafra, the one, the ports in the Niger Delta part of the country. So the bulk of slaves that went out of this continent were taken from our soil. Yet we act as though it never happened. I mean, Ghana did their year of return last year, 2019, and a lot of African Americans who return to Africa mostly go to places like Gambia, to Ghana, not to Nigeria, because we don't, it's not a subject that we've tapped into too much. However, I felt that the way in which he as well covered the subject explains why there's not so much, because I feel that we actually do not take any responsibility for some of our actions. Uh, those who were rulers in the time, some of those institutions still exist. The kings in various communities who were active slave traders. I mean, the economies dependent on slavery. It's good to say that, yeah, slavery was something that was done to us, but at some point we must, as well as Africans, acknowledge our part in it. And I think that that's something that we don't do enough of, or that we don't do at all. He tried to suggest that, oh yeah, the white people incentivized slavery, and they, but come on, even after slavery was abolished, we went on with it. There was still domestic slavery in Africa. I mean, if you in Nigeria, I mean, and it's a very touchy subject, I know, but it's one that we must address, because it goes down. It's not just about taking people and selling them. You must examine what's the thinking or the worldview that makes that possible. It's because you do not consider the other human as human enough. Basically, that's just what it is, And if we still hold that mentality today in the way we treat ourselves, where there's not much value for life, I mean, I still saw there's another, I still saw another film on the same Netflix, I think Oloturi or something, about something about, people being moved out of the country to Europe to work as sex workers, some of them as sex slaves. Is a form of slavery, and it's still happening today. So it shows you that it's a subject that we must address and we must come to terms with. Yeah, slavery happened back in the early centuries. Yeah, Europeans were buying slaves, but yeah, we were also selling slaves, and even after slavery, even after the British ended the slave trade, it's on record that a lot of African rulers objected to ending it. Now, that's not to say that all of us were barbaric and all of that. No, there were those amongst us who worked assiduously to end slavery. One of them being Samuel Ajayi Crowther, the first black bishop. He did a whole lot. He himself and some of the other Saro returnees, did a whole lot, and even people on ground to make sure that slavery was ended. So, in essence, what I'm saying is, yes, there's a European part of slavery, but I think that the way in which the documentary was the speak of the documentary, or the emphasis of the documentary, seemed to exempt us as Africans in terms of our part in the slave era, and that's not something that should be encouraged. We should come to terms with it, and we should accept that, yeah, we goofed in this area, and probably we could have done better, and we should do better, definitely. Also, something I also observed anyway was that sometimes, the need, or the attempt to, the criticism, the heavy critique of the British sometimes took away the nuance, did not give room for nuance. What do I mean? Sometimes it gives just too simplistic explanations for rather complex situations. So, for instance, when he described the advance on the caliphate, the attempt of the British to take the caliphate, I would have loved to see a lot more nuance in terms of what were the economic factors that made certain things possible, that made colonization possible. Were the local people happy that the British people took over? Were they, if you had the fact that he duly mentioned that there were Africans, so there were obviously Nigerians, other black people who made up the majority of the British army to attack some of the other kingdoms, and so I would have loved to understand why. So I have my own theory about some of those events, but I thought that documentary should have helped us understand why. And I think for me personally, my theory, it boils down to a resentment of some of the existing powers that existed then in terms of the African kingdoms. Some of them were oppressive towards the smaller nations, the smaller neighbors, and what have you. So that made the other ones readily accepting of the British help, so to speak, and were readily conscripted or co-opted into fighting for the British. Well, I may be right, I may not be right. It's not something I've researched that extensively, but what I'm saying is the fact that in the documentary, you could have had a lot more nuance, in the storytelling, and against just giving a single narrative of, oh, the British people were bad, they came to take our land and resources, and we were just helpless victims. I think life is a lot more complicated than that, really, and a documentary of that magnitude should have given a lot more nuance, than it did. That said, I think it's still a top-notch documentary. If you're Nigerian, if you're somebody who is trying to understand Nigeria, why Nigeria is the way it is, I encourage you to go ahead and see it. It's available on Netflix, and I think a lot more movie producers need to start thinking about bringing such stories to our screen. We need such educational materials, and in terms of the interest I've seen on social media around that documentary, yes, I can see that, yeah, if it's well put together, Nigerians will dig into it, So yeah, nice one. Well done to Olasupo Shasore and his team, and other people will also do things similar.